My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how one difficult decision changed everything in my life. Looking back now, I realize that choices, no matter how painful, have a way of shaping us into the people we are meant to become. When I was in my late 20s, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. On one side was the life I had carefully built, and on the other was a path that terrified me, filled with uncertainty but also the possibility of freedom and renewal. At the time, I was living in Denver, Colorado. I had been with my boyfriend, Daniel, for nearly 6 years. To everyone around us, we looked like the perfect couple. We had met in college, shared countless memories, and built a life that appeared stable. We had an apartment downtown with a view of the mountains, 2 cats, and friends who thought of us as inseparable. On paper, it seemed I should have been happy. But the truth is, I wasn't. Daniel was a good man in many ways. He was reliable, responsible, and steady. But there was a heaviness to our relationship, a weight that I felt every day. Over time, our conversations became shallow, and our dreams stopped overlapping. I wanted to travel, explore new places, and build a life filled with creativity and joy. Daniel wanted stability, routine, and predictability. For years, I tried to convince myself that this was enough, that maybe all relationships eventually settled into comfort rather than passion. But deep inside, I knew I was lying to myself. The turning point came one rainy night in March. I had stayed late at work, feeling drained from the monotony of my job at a marketing firm. When I came home, Daniel was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone, barely looking up as I walked in. There was no warmth, no spark, just silence that had become far too familiar. Something in me broke that night. I sat down across from him, and for the first time in years, I asked myself, is this really the life I want? I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the younger version of myself who had once been so full of dreams. She had wanted to write, to paint, to live a life of adventure. Where had she gone? She was buried beneath routines, compromises, and fears. The next morning, I looked at Daniel and said words I had been too afraid to say for years, I don't think this is working anymore. His face went pale. He thought I was joking at first, but when he realized I was serious, the anger came. He accused me of giving up too easily, of being selfish, of throwing away everything we had built. And maybe he was right in some ways. But I also knew that staying would mean betraying myself, living a life that wasn't truly mine. That day, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I ended a relationship that had defined nearly a decade of who I was. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was heartbreaking. Moving out of our apartment felt like tearing apart a piece of myself. I cried for weeks, wondering if I had made a mistake. My family was divided. Some supported me, while others thought I was being reckless. Friends didn't know what to say. And Daniel, he cut me off completely, which I understood. Still, the silence hurt. But with endings come beginnings. For the first time in years, I was forced to face myself. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I bought a second-hand desk and started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. The words poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. In those early months, life was not easy. Bills piled up, loneliness crept in at night. There were moments I thought about calling Daniel, begging him to take me back, just so I wouldn't feel so lost. But every time I reached for my phone, I reminded myself why I left. I left because I wanted to find myself again. The real turning point came one Saturday morning. I signed up for a local creative writing workshop. Walking into that room filled with strangers, I felt both nervous and alive. That's where I met Sarah, a free-spirited artist who quickly became one of my closest friends. She encouraged me to push myself, to share my stories, and to believe that my voice mattered. Through her, I was introduced to a whole community of writers, artists, and dreamers who reminded me of the life I had once envisioned for myself. Months turned into a year, and slowly, I began to change. I started publishing short stories online, and to my surprise, people responded. They wrote to me, telling me that my words touched them, that they saw themselves in my struggles. It was in those moments that I realized pain can transform into something meaningful if you allow it to. One day, I received an email from a small publishing house. They had stumbled across one of my stories and wanted to talk about turning it into a book. I stared at that email for what felt like forever, hardly believing it was real. That book eventually became a reality, and holding it in my hands for the first time was a moment I will never forget. But the changes didn't stop there. With new confidence, I started traveling, something I had always dreamed of. I went to Seattle, New York, even a solo trip to Italy where I wrote in cafes and wandered through old streets filled with history. Each journey reminded me of the decision I had once made, the decision that had seemed so terrifying but had set me free. Looking back now, I realize that leaving Daniel wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about choosing myself, about trusting that even though the road ahead was uncertain, I had the strength to walk it. I don't hate him, and I don't regret the years we shared. He was an important chapter in my life. But he wasn't the whole book. The difficult decision I made taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. Let go of the life you thought you were supposed to live, and make space for the life that is waiting for you. Everything changed the moment I chose courage over fear, authenticity over comfort. Now, when I look at my life, I see color where there was once gray. I see opportunities where there was once routine. And most importantly, I see a woman who finally found her voice. So if you are reading this and standing at your own crossroads, afraid to make that decision, know this: change is hard, but staying stuck is harder. Trust yourself. Sometimes the life you dream of is waiting just on the other side of fear. Because for me, one difficult decision didn't just change everything, it gave me everything.